All right, Coach C. First off, I want to thank you again for allowing me to come in and observe your lesson today. Sixth period, the anatomy classroom. We talked a little bit about some bones and stuff. What I want to do now is go through the post-conference portion of this. We've already went through the pre-conference, kind of got some expectations on your end and what you wanted me to observe. How do you think that the lesson went today?
I thought the lesson went well. I thought the kids were engaged. I thought that we were able to walk around the room and check for understanding, ask some leading questions, and I felt like they responded to it in an appropriate way.
Okay. You talked about leading questions. Do you feel like the leading questions were a main catalyst for you thinking that this part of the instruction went really well?
Yes, I do. I think it gets it started, kind of jump start after lunch. A lot of times it may be more lethargic during that time. So I think it gets them started, maybe hopefully gets them going, gets them more involved in class, and makes it more where they're more engaged.
Okay. You kind of mentioned lunch a little bit. With this being a 6-period class, what makes you feel like the class was lethargic? Was it in your presentation, the questions you had, or the way that they just kind of sat there and didn't apply themselves?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, it's kind of like pulling teeth. You had to get them to where they respond to you. It'd take a little time. You may have to, give them several prompts to make them respond to you. So that's why I gave the indication about it seemed like after lunch they're a little more lethargic and maybe after being through 5 classes during the day and stuff, it's a little harder sometimes.
Okay, I understand. Can you tell me how you feel about your role professionally within this lesson? I know here in a little bit we're going to talk about some of the goals for the lesson. We're going to talk about some of the things you wanted me to look at. But just in general, looking at yourself, not even necessarily looking at the students, how do you feel that you've done within this?
I thought the lesson went well. I thought, we were able to move around the room. We gave them several examples and tried to tie in real life examples to the lesson to help them understand it to a better degree. We tried to move around the room. We looked at the diagrams as they were filling it out, make sure they were filling it out correctly, answering questions if they got kind of confused or had any problems with it. So I felt like, it went well. There's always room for improvement, but I thought the lesson went pretty well today.
Okay, one thing that I noticed that I documented here, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about, is the way you differentiated your instruction. Not only did you have the textbook, which in our school system, let's stop there. Can you tell me about the textbooks themselves and maybe overcoming the age of the textbooks? How long has it been since we've been able to get new science books?
Oh, I would say we've had these books for over 10 years, and it is the anatomy books maybe not as quite as bad as the biology books that I teach out of, but it's things that we go on the internet. We try to find PowerPoints and diagrams and things that are present day to make it relevant and help the kids be more engaged and understand it is something they need to know that ties into present day life.
So would you think that would you feel safe in saying that the age of the textbooks kind of facilitated your differentiation maybe a little more than it would have been if we would have had up-to-date textbooks?
Sure, absolutely. Try to make things more relevant and try to use different things since the textbooks are aged a bit. Try to use different methods and materials to make it more real life and present day.
Okay. Some of the ways that you did this, not only during instruction with a lecture type format, but we had a skeleton, a disarticulated skeleton. We had a PowerPoint presentation on the board. We had charts, which we will talk about here in just a minute, and we had the book. Can you tell me how you have kind of evolved into using all of these, or is this something that you've always tried to use that many sources at one time?
I probably used more recently. We're starting a one-to-one initiative, so I'm trying to get online and find different websites to help the kids, to engage the kids more, to make it more interesting to the kids. So I've basically the last few years I've probably tried to use more PowerPoints and of course skeletons and things of that nature than just the paper and pencil diagrams or the book.
Okay. One thing that I noticed that you did right when we come into the classes is you gave the class clear expectations on what we were going to do. This is what we intend to happen today. Is that something that you feel like is a keystone part of this material, or do you feel like that it gives the kids an idea of when it's going to end more than anything?
I think it's always good that you tell the kids what to expect during the day, and not only when it's going to end, but so they know have they been successful in learning and getting what I want them to know for the day. And so I think it's imperative that we always set out our goals and tell what our objectives are going to be, and hopefully have some way to measure those. Now, some days we have better days, and some days we run out of time. We're not able to measure and find a closure to it. We sometimes have to carry it over to the next day. But I think it's important that we basically state what we're going to try to accomplish today and try to let the kids know what we're going to be able to get done today, and see if we can do it in an appropriate way.
In terms of a summative assessment, I know one of the very first things you said during class was that they will test this Friday as a whole on this entire course of study. So how did you assess throughout the lecture itself and the presentation itself? How did you assess, do I need to go faster? Do I need to pull back? Tell me some things that you feel like you did within the lesson to kind of see where they were.
I felt one thing, of course, we asked some questions about, their knowledge of bones, things we covered in lab, things we covered already in other lectures and tests, the previous tests we'd had on the skeletal system. See how well they were responding to my questions. We also walked around the room, make sure they were filling out the diagrams correctly, make sure they were on task, make sure they were engaged, and make sure they were, being able to do the diagrams, fill them out completely and correctly. And also, I felt like, we were able to look at their expressions and see if they're engaged, make sure they were. You can tell sometimes by facial expressions if they're understanding, if they're on task, if they know what's going on.
Okay. I know one thing we talked about during our pre-conference was the way the summative assessment will be set up. You had spoke about how earlier in your teaching career it was more focused on a pen and paper exam, but kind of as you've evolved as a teacher and a presenter of the material, you've kind of went to a mixed methods way. Can you explain to me how the summative assessment will be set up?
Yeah, I'm going to do it kind of a little bit of both. I'm going to have a paper and pen for them to fill out with the diagrams. And then also I'll have the bones out. And then based on the lab work we've already done, I may hold up the bones and ask them to identify certain bones, to give me certain characteristics on the bones, and make it a mixture during the test assessment on Friday.
Okay, do you feel like, and I know I'm kind of going ahead of myself here a little bit, but one of your goals, your main overarching goals of this presentation was to bring real life implication to the presentation. Do you feel like by using the bones and the students visibly seeing this is what my femur looks like, this is what my humerus looks like, this is what my ulnar radius looks like if one breaks, do you feel like that helps them understand things better when a real life issue comes up?
I do. I think by seeing the bones, in previous lessons I brought x-rays out. We've looked at x-rays, and of course most of them have had either a broken bone, they know somebody with a broken bone, they've gone through the process of getting x-rays, and now they know some basically being able to identify the bones they see on x-rays, and if they happen to them or if they happen down the road to a child or a parent or to a loved one, they have some understanding. They know what they're talking about when health professionals talk to them, and they hopefully have better understanding, and they'll help them down the road.
Okay. At the end of class today, I typed up some notes and sent them to you. We're going to kind of look at those right now, and I want to kind of get your thoughts and feelings on what you've seen. The very first thing I did was our seating chart here. We have 4 males on the left side of the room, the far left-hand side. We had 1 male sitting in the very front of the classroom, followed by 6 females with no one sitting in the tables on the right side of the classroom. So my first observation obviously was there's nobody on the right side of the classroom. Is this a norm, or is this something that you've kind of facilitated because of instructional purposes?
These are junior 11th grade students, and I've kind of given them a little bit of freedom of they can come in just so they handle themselves in an appropriate way, and it doesn't their seating doesn't interrupt any kind of instruction during the time. I let them have the freedom to sit where they want to, and so as far as not being on one side of the room rather than the other is purely coincidental, and they're able to do that based on where they want to sit. So it's nothing that I've done. They've done that on their own.
Okay. Another thing that you asked me to look at was kind of the direction you teach in. We have the right lane here. We have the left lane here. You were 12 times down the left lane, 9 times down the right lane. However, when you walk down the right lane, you kind of made a circle almost to make it up the right lane and then down the left-hand side. Is this a habit, or is this something that seeing this data you think, wow, I didn't realize I did that?
Probably didn't realize I was going up one way and down the other. In my mind, when I was presenting the lesson, I just wanted to make sure my eyes were on all the students, and I was making sure they were getting the data correctly, they were filling out the diagrams correctly, they were on task, they wasn't, doing other things that would keep them from being able to learn the material. So I didn't really realize that I was going in one specific rotation, if you will, or one certain pattern. I was just trying to make sure I got to see all the kids at a certain time and make sure everything was going in an appropriate way.
Okay. One thing that you did do the entire time was you kind of implemented a Ron White method of teaching. Ron Clark, not the comedian Ron Clark. Your hands were always moving. You always had either something in your hands or you were directing with your hands. Is this something that you've developed as an educator / presenter, or is this something that you've always had?
We always tried. Now, I feel like as we've taught, the more years we taught, we try to improve ourselves and try to do a better job. But we always try to engage. I want my kids to be engaged. I want them to try to know that if I'm enthusiastic about the material, hopefully they'll be enthusiastic about the material. So I try to do different things to help them get in that situation, to make them engage as much as we can, to help them understand it, to break it down into smaller tasks so they can understand it and retain it in a way for not only the test purposes, but on down life and down the road.
Okay. There were several times during the class where you opened the class up for questions from the class for you to take, not necessarily the other way around where you were probing the students, kind of gauging where they were at. A male individual that sat in the very front and center of the classroom, he probably led the class in questions while I was observing. We had a couple of other males down the side, and only one female really that seemed like she always asked questions. Is this kind of what you expected? Is this the norm? Or looking at this, does a light bulb go off?
I think that's probably closer to the norm. I don't know if it's personality, interest in the class. Again, if it's their personality, they probably, if you were here day in and day out, they would probably ask the most questions than the other kids. And then I thought during the lesson there were several kids that did ask questions. I wouldn't say that all of them asked a question, but I feel like there was a good of the 11, the majority of them asked questions, responded to me some way during the lesson today. But personality-wise, interest-wise, higher level thinking-wise, those students usually day in, day out probably do answer and ask more questions during class.
Okay. Another thing we kind of spoken about a little earlier was correlation with seating preferences and grades. If I was to look at this and say, this gentleman in the front asked the most questions, he seemed to be the most engaged, how is his overall average in comparison to, say, one of these females in the back?
His probably a little bit higher because he has an interest in the subject matter, maybe to a little better degree. The ones in the back, they're really good girls. I think they do give effort while they're in class. Now, they may not spend as much time. They do have a lot of extracurricular activities, athletics. Both of these are two really good athletes. One's a basketball player, one's a cross-country runner. So they probably have a lot of external circumstances that they spend time away from class other than working in anatomy. He's an interest in science. He's member of the robotics team, so he probably spends more time working on the science curriculum than the two ladies in the back do.
So you feel like those variables, more than seating preference, really have a larger impact on the average?
Yeah, no question.
Okay. Is there anything here that jumps out at you other than the things that we've already discussed?
Not really. Everything else we talked about, I think we're seeing in the diagram, and that backs up what we've already talked about.
Okay. All right. One thing that you wanted me to do was to collect some data from the students to kind of gauge directly from the students where they're at. The male student in the front that seemed to be asking a lot of questions, he was one of the information people that I got from, and one of the females in the back that we just spoke from was the other one. So I want you to look at their two charts. Very drastic differences in the two. Female in the back has all of her spaces filled in, seems like to the T, the information that you had written down. Whereas the male individual that was up front that has the higher average does not. Looking at these two, what do you think? Is it a learning style difference, or is it maybe a note-taking preference? What do you think? Looking at this, jumps out at you?
I think she has everything because her knowledge base may not be as vast. She may not. If he knew it, he may not have written it down because he already knew it from previous lessons or from previous material. So the things he already knew, he probably didn't take the time to write it down because he felt like it may be a waste of time. But on the other hand, because her knowledge not as bad, but it's not as great, she may have not trusted her knowledge, and so she wanted to write everything down to make sure she didn't miss anything because she does maybe have to spend more time in studying and trying to get it than he does.
One other question that I was going to ask that we haven't really gotten around to yet, have you taken a kind of a straw poll of what these students who are juniors now, in 2 years they're going to be out into society, how many of your students are interested in science, technology, engineering, the STEM aspects of things? How many of those do you have in this class?
I think there's several in this class. I'm going to say probably a small class, 11 kids, I'm going to say probably 40 or 50% are at least that are involved and want to be, has interest in higher level science, whether it be engineering, maybe in the health profession, it's nursing and things to that nature. But I would say a big percentage of them has interest in higher level science classes and would like to move on.
Okay. All right. Let's look at your personal goals. What are some of the things that we had talked about that you would like for me to look at before I came into the classroom? The very first thing you talked about was student engagement. Second thing, would the students be motivated to learn the material? Was it a monotonous deal, or did they really enjoy being here? Were your leading questions, did they elicit answers? Did they require deep, higher order thinking? And you had talked a little bit about that. Can we integrate technology? That's another thing that with the PowerPoint presentation, and you kind of alluded earlier to the one-to-one initiative. One thing that I did a little background research on and maybe could help share with you here is a website called interbody.com. Interbody.com is kind of a interactive website where the students can go and like today, like say you were talking about the head, they could pull the head up, and every suture, every bone in the head you can click on, and it gives specifics with those. So maybe that's something that you might could take with you later on.
Absolutely.
Flow, directionality, we've kind of already discussed, and where your objectives clearly stated at the start of class. Now, the bottom three we've already talked about. I want to get your opinion on student engagement and motivation of the students. Do you feel like the students today were engaged and motivated?
I think for the most part, you always maybe have some that's not as motivated as others. But I thought, looking around the room, going around the room, asking some questions and talking about it, that most of them were motivated to a great degree, to a pretty good degree, and they were engaged fairly well.
Okay. I want to ask you about one instance, actually two instances that happened during class, and it kind of ties in with engagement and motivation at the same time. During one of your rounds that you were making, you stopped and pointed directly at a paper of a student. Was that because you felt like they were lost, that they were kind of missing the motivation, missing the point? Kind of what were you seeing there that made you?
I wanted to make sure she was at the right spot, make sure that she was getting the material as we talked about it, and that she was seeing the things that I was emphasized during that, and make sure she was on the right item of the class and things. So I just thought that maybe if I pointed to it and reassured her that was correct, that that's what she should be filling out, that's what she should be seeing, I felt that would help her during that time of the lesson.
Okay. There was also the second time I was talking about was an instance where you have a bone in your hand and you're discussing the bone, and I believe we're actually talking about maybe a fissure in the bone, and you ask a student in the back of the classroom, "Are you good? Are you okay?" Did you see something there that you felt like needed to be addressed immediately?
Well, yeah, I thought the two were. I thought the two were asking if I thought maybe one of them may have missed an item that we'd covered. I wanted to make sure that they, a lot of times, and I don't mind if they're asking questions to make sure that the material that's being presented, if one of them didn't get it and one of them did, to help each other out. But I want to make sure that the information they're receiving is good information, is correct information. So I just wanted to check, make sure that the information they were receiving was correct, and if they needed anything additional from me, that I could respond to them and help them in that manner.
Okay. We talked previously about this specific lesson and how you have taught it for 12 years. After going through the coaching process where we've been able to kind of talk openly about some things, look at the way you differentiate instruction, how do you feel like this lesson will go in the future? Do you feel like you're at a really good spot? I know we've spoken a little bit about maybe improving. How do you feel like you could improve this lesson in the future?
I think, I think it was a good lesson. Can it be improved? Yes, I think you can always improve. I think, as we talked about, as we get better in technology, as we go to the one-to-one initiative and they get devices, I think we can go to the website you were speaking of, the interbody.com, and they can use it to a greater degree. They can maybe be more engaged with a piece of technology at their disposal than maybe the paper and pencil diagrams. And they can get immediate feedback. They can go through and label the bones and know exactly how much are they getting right, how many they miss, and get more opportunities than maybe just going over it once or twice in class. They can do it several times in class and get more of an opportunity to learn and make sure they're getting the material in the correct fashion.
Okay. The end result of this coaching process is professional improvement. And for us to improve professionally directly correlates to student achievement. If we're better as educators, then our students will be better as students. So how do you feel like you have grown professionally through this coaching process?
I think anytime you have a different set of eyes and people are watching and they're able to help you, I think it helps you better as an educator and as a teacher. Sometimes what you think is a good way of doing it, if you get someone else's opinion, someone else's experiences, and say, hey, this is the way I think it would work better if you do this, and get a different idea and a different opinion on it. I think it'll help you and use it in a constructive way.
So would you think that adding the interbody.com website, which we spoke of a little bit earlier, do you think that will help broaden the presentation so it can aid you in being a better instructor?
No question. Yeah, I think that would help out tremendously, and I think it would help the kids as well as me get the material across in a better way. No question.
Coach C, thanks again, and this won't be the last time we do this. I hope to get in your classroom some more, and we can continue to grow professionally together.
That'd be great. Appreciate it.